During that night, I went out under the stars to go to the bathroom. And while I was under the stars, I looked up at the heavens, which seemed particularly close since there was no electricity in that tent. And I thought about my mother, who had died the previous January in Boston at the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital from a spleen. Her spleen had taken over, her bone marrow had stopped producing blood, and her spleen grew very large, and they took it out, and she died. And I wasn't thinking about how she died. I just was thinking about her because I had been with her during the period of her dying, and we had experienced a very high state, quite independent of our relation as parent and child or in bodies, and I had never felt any loss when she died, which quite amazed me. Even though as a psychologist I was saying, no grief reaction, watch it. And I thought about her, and I just thought about how close I felt to her, and then I went back to bed. I said nothing about this. And the next day, he said, we're going to get the Land Rover and go up into the mountains because I have to go see my guru. And he had never mentioned even having a guru. And I had a very funny feeling about gurus, that it was a hustle. And that maybe he meant a high teacher. And I assumed it would be somebody Buddhist, but you didn't call them gurus usually, and the whole thing was confusing. And furthermore, the Land Rover I hated now, and it hadn't been left for me anyway. It had been left with a sculptor, and I knew if we borrowed it, it would be my responsibility, and I didn't want the responsibility, and I was sort of sulking, and I was sort of hungover from all the hashish I had smoked, which I now was finished smoking. And we got the Land Rover, which he made us take, and he wouldn't let me drive. And I was just sitting sulking in the front seat. And we went up into the mountains about 100 miles, and we came to a little temple by the side of the road, and he stopped, and I could tell something big was going to happen because he was crying all the way up. Singing and crying and coming on. And I was very angry. And I thought, oh, all this is a young 23-year-old kid. He just wants to have a big Land Rover. And I'm going back to America. I've had enough of this. And we stop, and the car's surrounded, and he says, where is Maharaji? Means great king. And they say he's up on the hill, and he goes running off up the hill, and everybody's sort of ignoring me. And I'm following him, stumbling behind this 6'7" giant, and he's crying and running, and I'm stumbling, and I'm angry and bugged, and I don't want to do this. And we walk around a hill so that we're out of sight of the road. And we come into a hillside with a valley behind it, a beautiful scene. And there is sitting a little old man with a blanket, and he's surrounded by about 8 or 9 Indians. And this tall fellow is stretched out flat in what's called Danda Pranam, with his hands touching the feet of this man. And he's crying, and the man's patting his head and smiling. And I take a look at this scene, and it's quite beautiful, but I'm too bugged to really appreciate it. And I think, well, I'm not going to touch his feet. I mean, we don't do that in the West. So I sort of stood back, figuring, look, I can just be an observer. I'm just a passenger in the car. I don't have to do it. After a little while, this old man pulled his hair, and he said to him, have you got a picture of me? And the boy said, yeah. And he said, well, give it to him. So I thought, gee, that's very nice, This little old man's going to give me a picture of himself. And I smiled, thank you very much, See, there was a guy who would translate. The school principal was one of the 8 people, and he would sort of say everything in English afterwards. Then he looked up at me, and I was still very uptight. He looked up at me and he said, you came in a big car? Like the one topic, see, that I'm uptight about. So I said, yeah. He said, you'll give it to me? So I started to say, well, and this young fellow said, Maharaji, if you want it, it's yours. And I said, now, wait a minute. You can't go giving away David's car. It's not our car to give away. This little old man says to me, you made much money in America? So I said, yeah, one time I made. He said, how much did you make? So I was into bragging. I needed something for my ego. I said, well, one year I made $25,000. So they all figured that out in rupees, and everybody was impressed. It's like 60 billion rupees or something like that. So he said, you'll buy a car like that for me? Now, I grew up in a family that was very involved with Jewish charities, and I knew about getting money, but I had never been hustled so fast in my life. I didn't even know who he was, and he was already asking me for a $7,000 car. And he's smiling at me all the time. I mean, he's putting me on. That's really what it boils down to. So I say, well, perhaps. And then he says, take them away, give them food. And we're taken off and given food. A big sumptuous feast. At the end of the feast, we rest, and then we're brought back to him. And he says, come sit. So I go and sit down. He said, you were out under the stars last night. You were thinking about your mother. Yeah. She died last year. Closed his eyes for a second. He said, she got very big in the stomach before she died. I said, yeah. He says, spleen. She died of spleen. When he said that, two things happened to me. One was that my mind raced faster and faster and faster through every conceivable CIA super paranoia I could conceive of to figure out what was happening to me. I mean, who was putting me on? Like, had they brought me here? Was this some monstrous training program? And a dossier was spread behind this little man. He pushed a button and the ground opened up. And I mean, like, that's very far out because even the guy I was traveling with didn't know that stuff. And I was just a passenger in the car. Boy, they're really good at their game. And I went through what are the probabilities, you see? Because, see, in the past, I was in this position that when things like this happen, they didn't happen to me usually. They happen to somebody else. And I said, well, that's nice. You certainly have to keep an open mind about those things. And when it did happen to me, I was always out of my head on psychedelics. And how did I know it had happened and I hadn't just created the whole thing out of whole cloth? Because I had taken some psychedelics that did that kind of thing. I remember taking a thing called JB318. And I was sitting in a room and nothing was happening. And I thought, gee, nothing much happens with this drug, does it? Even though the fellow I took it with, who was about 50, was doing cartwheels through the room. But I felt nothing. And then this girl from the community I was living in walked in and she said, would you like some lemonade? And I said, that would be great. And she poured this glass of lemonade and it got to the top and she kept pouring and it went over the side and down the side and across the wall and up the wall and across the ceiling and down and under my pants. And then it went back up and my pants got wet. And I moved, and then it went back up, and as it touched the glass disappeared, and the girl disappeared, and my wet pants were no longer wet. And I turned to Ralph Metzner, who was sitting next to me, and I said, Ralph, the most unusual thing just happened to me. And Ralph disappeared. And thus, I was perfectly willing when the people at Harvard said, you people have been taking these drugs. You are therefore not reputable scientists anymore as observers. And I was perfectly delighted to say, I will be data. Study me. And it may be, it's too bad what happened to those guys in the 60s at Harvard, So my mind went faster and faster and faster. And then it went through every desperate ploy and search through all the storage units. And then just like a computer that has been fed an insoluble problem, finally, so the machine doesn't burn out entirely, a red light goes on and a bell rings and the machine stops. And that is what happened. My mind just gave up. And simultaneously, and this was not, I couldn't experience it as cause and effect. All I experienced it was the simultaneity of it. He was looking right at me and sort of just looking right at me. I felt this very violent tugging sensation in my chest. It was very painful. And I started to cry. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And I wasn't happy and I wasn't sad. The closest I could come to description of feelings was like, I'm home, or it's over, or whew, or it's all right, or wow, that kind of thing. Cried and cried and cried, and they took me away. And I was taken to a temple about 12 miles away, and I was given a nice room, and I was sitting in the room, and during the evening I was very confused, And at one point, I was going through my shoulder bag, and I came to the bottle of LSD. I thought, this guy is going to know what LSD is, because he knows everything. I'll have to ask him. Next morning at 8 o'clock, messenger comes. Maharaji wants to see you. We go over the 12 miles to the temple. I'm just approaching him about 5, 6 yards away from him, and he yells out, have you got a question? And I take one look at him, and all I want to do is touch his feet. I don't have any question. It's so warm and beautiful, and there's so much light coming out of him. And I say, no, I don't have any question. And he gets very impatient. And he says, where's the medicine? Medicine? So Guru Brother says, well, maybe he means the LSD. I said, LSD? Acha, the LSD. Bring the LSD. So I go and I bring the bottle of LSD. I hold out my hand. He wants to see. So I hold out my hand and pour it in. He says, well, what's that? And I said, well, that's LSD. And so that's STP, and that's Librium, it's Tuinol, and, it's my traveling kit. In those days, I hasten to add, for the benefit of the people whose business it is to protect us from those kind of traveling kits. And he says, does it give you siddhis? And I didn't know what the word siddhis meant. And I said siddhis, and it was translated as powers to me. And I didn't realize it was spiritual powers. I thought he was asking for physical power. I thought he wanted something like vitamin B12. And I didn't have anything like that, and I was really depressed, because I really wanted to give him whatever he wanted. I mean, I would have given him anything at that point. He could have the Land Rover if he wanted. So I said, gee, I'm sorry, I don't have that. And I poured it back into the bottle, and I was very sad. No. And he holds out his hand. So I put one pill in his hand, and these are called white lightning, and they were about 275 micrograms of LSD, but these were a special batch that had been made for me as a going-away present, and they were each 305 micrograms. He looked, and come on. So I put a second on his hand. That was 610 micrograms. For a 70-year-old man, you usually, like 150 under suitable conditions. Can't be too careful. Never know about the heart. And he looks and says, come on. So I put a third one. That's 915. That's going to do it. I mean, it's good LSD. And he looks, acha, and he downs the whole business. And the scientist in me says, well, this is going to be interesting. And all day I hung around, and every now and then he'd twinkle at me. And of course, nothing happened at all. So that was the answer to that question. He continued to manifest these, what we in the West call miracles, certainly the capacity to know everything I was thinking at all times.